So if you're in a job and you're feeling like it's time to move on, you've got a choice. Get another job. You have another choice. You can become an entrepreneur. Now, as an entrepreneur, you can start something off from scratch, or a very safe route, and it still means hard work, is to go down the franchising route. So today we have joining with us Iain Martin. Iain Martin is one of the top consultants for franchisees and franchisors in the United Kingdom, and he's going to share some phenomenal wisdom which will be very useful for you to know before you decide to become a franchisee, and if you run a business before you become a franchisor too. Welcome to the Harun Rabbani Show. So the question that is probably on your mind is there a point in running a business if there's a 80%, 90% chance you're going to fail within 5 years? So let's ask the question to Iain. Iain, welcome to the Harun Rabbani Show. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll put the question to you. A lot of entrepreneurs fail. Why is it that they fail within the first 5 years of their business?
I think there are a whole range of different reasons. It ranges from inadequate financing. Inevitably, my experience certainly is that if you're starting a new business, it always takes a lot more money and a lot more time than you ever envisaged when you drew up that original business plan. So I think inadequate financing is one key area. Another one is, however well you plan to launch a business, you'll find that unexpected things happen which can throw you off course, and again delay what happens and cost more money than you ever dreamed. And so those would be two key areas that I think linked to that, of course, is people have ideas about how they're going to promote their business and get customers. But again, my experience is that very often those customer acquisition strategies don't work in quite the way that the theory said they should when you produce the initial business plan.
Let's just say somebody makes, I don't know, whatever widget that they make, and they've got a passion for it. Now, they're technically good, and they launch their business, and the product seems amazing, and they expect queues of people forming outside their home or their shop or going onto the internet to just buy their product.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key skills, or what's a key missing piece from their equation that stops customers from coming to them?
I don't think it's necessarily a key thing that stops people coming to them. I think people need that. One of the big issues is that the people who are likely to be customers often are unaware of the service or the product. And so getting to those people and helping them to understand how that product or service can benefit them and why they should go there rather than anywhere else it is a key challenge, particularly if the product or service is innovative and disruptive. Then obviously people have already been doing whatever they're doing in some particular way and often need quite a bit of persuasion to change their minds. So I think the whole marketing strategy, how you're going to get the message out, how you're going to talk about your product or service in a language that relates to people and puts your product or service at the top of their want list, rather than, oh, that's an interesting idea, maybe I'll have a look at it at some point, is pretty fundamental.
One of the things is the statistics, the failure rate. Now, you've specialized in franchising. Why? What are the figures? What do they look like with somebody who sets up a franchise? When I say sets up a franchise, becomes a franchisee.
There are good franchises and bad franchises, Harun. And obviously, if you happen to invest in the wrong franchise, then you could end up in difficulties. But for the good franchises, which are typically members of the British Franchise Association, which is a standards-based association which attempts to ensure that its members do meet minimum criteria, then franchisees, after 5 years, the statistics are that 95% of them are not only still trading, but they're trading profitably. And what you'll probably think, well, why is that? Well, the reason is that in a well-structured franchise, you're actually replicating something that already works. You cannot franchise a business that is failing and expect a franchise model to transform it. Franchising is about replicating something that already exists, documenting it, systematizing it, and then allowing others to actually operate it for themselves and of course for you. So the point about that, of course, is if you follow the system that the franchisor gives to you when you invest in the franchise, then you are very likely to be successful because you've got the marketing system, you know the operational processes, etc., etc., etc. And one interesting factor, Harun, which constantly amazes me, is the single biggest reason why franchisees fail is because they fail to follow the system, which is slightly counterintuitive because you think, well, why would you spend money on a franchise and not follow it? But that's what people seem to do.
Let's talk about the failure rate. Or success rate, I should say, really. What percentage of franchisees, if they run it correctly, exist after 5 years?
Well, as I say, 95% of the ones who invested 5 years ago will not only be trading, but they will be trading successfully. So for somebody who would like to get into business for themselves, hasn't got a particular bent that they're desperate to kind of launch onto the marketplace, taking a franchise as a way of almost not only making money, but learning how to run an independent business or a nearly independent business is a great next step. However, what I would say as a word of caution, if somebody is very entrepreneurial and is pressing at the envelope from day one, challenging the systems and everything, the logo, the way things are done, then probably franchising isn't for them, because it's going to be a very uncomfortable relationship for both franchisor and franchisee. But if you want to be in business for yourself and enjoy the rewards associated with that, then and you can follow a system and are happy to do so, then a franchise can be a great option.
That actually creates a whole bunch of questions, which I'm going to put to you in a moment. But let's just imagine, I'll pretend I work in a corporate sector. I'm on, let's just say, £60,000 a year. If I was to launch a franchise or become a franchisee, I should say, what kind of incomes, and I know this is a very difficult one to answer, what kind of income should I be looking at? Because obviously if I've got my family, my kids, there's a certain amount I should be aiming for as a minimum. Is there a particular range I should be looking at?
One of the things that I do in my role as an independent advisor, Harun, is to consider income is a key criteria, clearly, for people. They need to know that they're going to be able to manage their commitments, children's education, housing, etc. But it's only one consideration. I think there are many others that people need to consider. For example, what sort of lifestyle do you want? Some people are very happy working 24/7. Other people think that doesn't sound much like a life and would prefer to be Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. How much do you want to invest? How much have you got available to invest? Is another key issue. And whilst it's true that with a well-structured franchise, normally you can borrow 70% of the total investment required, you've still got to come up with the 30%. So if it's £100,000 total requirement for cash, you need to have 30,000. But to get round to answering your point about typical incomes, they can vary dramatically. If it's a man and a van type franchise, then it might be turning over £100,000 a year, of which a franchisee would maybe net 40 to 50,000, depends on the product, the service, and so on. If it's a management franchise where you're employing staff and turning over, say, £1 million a year, you might expect a net profit of maybe 15%, sometimes 20%. So somewhere between 1 and 200,000. But it's going to take time to build up to that. And of course, one of the great things about taking on a franchise business, particularly if they're it's not a brand new one, is there are going to be franchisees out there who've already done it. They're going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And so you can get a very good feel of what the average level of income generation is over those early years, and then build your business plan with appropriate assumptions.
Is there a particular type of skill set a franchisee needs to have to become a successful franchisee? So, for example, if somebody is working, let's just say, in a management capacity, they don't have any hands-on skills, but they want to throw themselves into the catering trade, take up one of the pizza chains or something like that. Do they need a certain skill set? Is that a market they should even consider entering?
The core attributes that a franchisee should have, the first one is attitude. There's got to be a can-do attitude. Sometimes people will take on a franchise and they just kind of expect, the paycheck to come in every month. And of course it doesn't. You're responsible for your own business success, own cash generation, etc., etc., and the buck stops with you. So having a positive attitude when challenges come and picking yourself up and moving forward again, that's vitally important. Taking ownership for the results, taking the formula and recognizing that the franchisor wants you to succeed, but that he's not going to do it for you. You've got to get out there and make it happen. Attitude is very important. Ability to follow the system is very important. Having a development orientation. So if it is, for example, a management franchise, which you've alluded to, focusing on building that business and having the right staff in place. Typically, whilst I don't think any of us are either one or the other, typically people running business will either have a propensity towards the sales and marketing side or towards the operational side. And obviously, if you've got a franchise that requires both skills, and most do, ensuring that those exist within the team is very important, even though in the early days you may be doing probably the marketing side yourself and possibly also the operations side. In terms of specific skills, it's often the case, Harun, that franchisors don't want people that think they know how to run something. So, for example, in many businesses, because you're required to follow a system, the franchisor would prefer you to not have any specific vertical market knowledge, because then you're going to pay real attention to how they do it, whether it's flipping pizzas or cleaning drains, rather than thinking, I know all that, and just switch off. Which during the training, which obviously can be a major issue. So I think the generic attributes, in a way, are far more important than the vertical market attributes. Although, having said that, there are obviously exceptions to that. For example, if you were going to take one of the Specsavers or one of these ophthalmic type franchises, and obviously in most cases you will require a qualification. But those are the minority. For the majority, if it's a management franchise, having people management skills is important. Having a sales orientation is important. Having, depending on the type of franchise, a certain type of sales skill may be required. If it's business to business, if you've done that previously, that will be a major benefit. So I think it's more generic skills and ability to follow the system rather than specific vertical market.
For somebody to immerse themselves into the whole franchise model, obviously if they've just been working all their life, then it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of commitment. Yeah. How much support is there available or given by franchisors to their franchisees?
The good franchisors give a huge amount of support. Again, the good franchisors, whilst they will make a certain amount of money from selling a franchise or awarding a franchise to a franchisees, the major win for them comes downstream when they're taking a percentage of the franchisees' revenues. And obviously, if that is the model, then the bigger the revenues, the bigger the percentage, the bigger the win for the franchisor. So a franchisor, it's in their commercial interest to help the franchisee succeed, but also, and I think very importantly, the best franchisors get a real buzz out of seeing their franchisee succeed as a result of using the system that they trained them in. So you will get a very comprehensive initial training program. You will get a lot of hands-on support, certainly in the early days. There will be ongoing meetings with regional management who are there to help ensure that everything's going as it should do. Good franchisors, one of the great advantages of being part of a franchise network is benchmarking can take place. So you can see what good or success looks like. And if, for example, your business is not making the money it should be, you can say, well, let's just have a look. How, what's your labor cost as a percentage of total revenue? What's your product costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and see where you're outside what the norm is looking like. So, and the franchisor will share all that with you to help you address those issues. There'll be annual conferences, there'll be maybe quarterly meetings, all sorts of ways where the actual franchise network, it becomes a learning organization to help share best practice.
If we flip the roles, imagine some of our listeners have got a very successful business and they want to roll it out and they're giving consideration to becoming a franchisor. What are the key considerations that they've got to take into account before even jumping into the whole world of franchising?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, Harun, the first thing is their business has to be profitable and success, and the model that what they do has to work on a regular basis. It's also got to be capable of being run on a distributed basis, if you like. If it's based in Birmingham, it needs to be able to be run in Newcastle or Leicester or London or wherever by other people. It's got to be something that can be, the skills required or the knowledge required can be easily transferred. If it's a concept where either the personality or the unique skills of the entrepreneur that started it are what makes it successful, then that's going to be very hard to replicate, or certainly it's going to be very hard to find people with similar skills. I think another very important element is the franchisor needs to understand how a new person would acquire customers and retain them. Very often, I know when I used to be more involved in the consulting business, I talk to successful business owners. I say, well, okay, you're based in Birmingham, so a guy opens a franchise in Newcastle. How's he going to get his customers? And of course, what emerges is they've been growing over the last 20 years and they've built up a strong reputation in the local area, but haven't really thought through how somebody actually gets new customers in a greenfield territory. That's going to be very important. Can the business be systematized and documented so that it can be replicated whilst maintaining all the standards and qualities that the franchisor would require? So those are some of the areas. I think another area which a consultant, and I don't do this these days, but a good consultant would be able to help somebody determine is if there is enough money in the model for everybody to be happy. Is the franchisor going to make something out of it? The franchisee going to make something out of it? Is the customer going to get good value for money?
I've known you a number of years, but we've not really interacted. And for those of you who have heard of Junior Chamber International, we've both been presidents of Birmingham and Birmingham Junior Chamber of Commerce, which is our local chapter. So how did you get yourself into the world of franchising? Well, what attracted you to be in this field?
For me, Harun, it was a bit of a personal crisis. When my first marriage failed, I thought I needed to actually examine my life again, and I moved into a completely new field, which interestingly is often why some people do move into franchising, because there's been some personal crisis or a situation that means that they want to change. It could be they've got a boss who is stopping them progressing their career or is just difficult to work for. It could be a personal crisis. It could be redundancy. It could be but normally there's some trigger point that means people will choose to give up a significant employed income and step out into franchise ownership. And that was, for me, I moved out of the corporate world and into a self-employed world, and that was 25 years ago.
You're part of a couple of collaborative operations, one of them being mrfranchise.co.uk.
Yes.
What is it that you do for your clients? I mean, who are your clients?
If somebody says, for example, I'd like to buy a franchise and I know exactly what I'm looking for, I want to have a McDonald's, then they can go to McDonald's and apply and hope to get through their system, which, by the way, is very challenging. Very few people succeed. But for many people, they say, I like the idea of owning my own business. I understand that franchising is a much safer option for me. But with over 1,000 brands out there, and I know some of them are good guys and some of them aren't good guys, and I haven't really got a handle on what's going to work best for me. Obviously, I can look at the investment level, I can maybe get some feel of what I'm going to earn, but I recognize that isn't the total story. So what Mr. Franchise and our consultants is able to do is to start with the individual. So rather than say, do you want a McDonald's or a Burger King or any other type of franchise, we say, let's talk about you. Let's talk about the lifestyle you're looking to enjoy. You're a family person. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? How much money do you want to earn? How much cash have you got available for investment? Do you want to be working from home, or do you like the idea of moving, working somewhere out of home? Would you prefer business to business? Is that where your background is, or would you prefer business consumer, etc., etc.? So we profile the individual, and then once we understand what's going to work for that person based on their preferences and on their background experience and core attributes, we will then say, well, based on that, we would recommend typically 2 or 3 brands where not only do they meet the requirements of the individual looking for a franchise, but very importantly, we know that they will also meet the franchisor's requirements for a successful franchisee.
It sounds like a matchmaking service, actually. Matchmaking service which actually prevents a lot of pain and a lot of loss of money as well, right?
That's exactly what we do. So once we make an introduction, if we've done our job well, which we do, I think pretty much most of the time, then there are going to be happy marriages, if you like, Harun, and successful franchisees.
But what's the best way for people to get hold of you?
They can contact me by email at iain.martin@mrfranchise.co.uk, and that's probably the easiest way to reach me.
Brilliant. Okay, so for podcast listeners, this is going to be on the show notes and obviously also on the description for our YouTube viewers. So is there one particular final message you want to end the show with for our listeners, for either franchisees or franchisors, for their life in the world of entrepreneurship?
Probably the one message I would like to leave them with, Harun, is you referred earlier to the fact that people can be a bit nervous about taking that step into business for themselves. The comment that I hear more often than any other from people who've stepped particularly into franchising is, I wish I'd have done this earlier. It's been the best decision I've ever made. And I would say that if anybody isn't feeling nervous when they take the step either into self-employment just on their own or even into franchising, if they're not feeling nervous, they're probably not a sentient, feeling, compassionate human being. And so it's entirely normal, but it's, as I say, for many, it's the best decision they've ever made. And I'd encourage you, if you're thinking down that route, go for it, but do it with good advice and thorough research. And if you wanted to talk to us, we'd be delighted to talk to you.
Fabulous. Iain Martin, thank you so much for joining the Harun Rabbani Show.
Thank you, Harun.
Hey, thank you very much for watching. If this has been relevant to you, make sure you apply what you've learned. I always say this, right, week in, week out. And please feel free to share the video. Any information that you want to tap into, well, it's all in the show notes or the description. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.